Hello and namaste. I am Anushka Silwal, and joining us today is Dr. John Whitney Pettit. He is a scholar, a translator, and an artist with a profound background in Buddhist studies, philosophy, and the fine arts. With a Ph.D. from Columbia University and various teaching experiences from prestigious institutions such as McGill, Vassar, and Bard, he is also an author and a fine linguistic fluent in multiple languages. Hello, John. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Anushka.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm very excited to have you here. So let's dive right into it.
Okay.
You have a fascinating background in fine arts before you moved into Buddhist studies. What inspired this transition? How did you get into the Buddhist studies side of all of it?
Well, it's interesting that you would point that out, or that you would put it that way, because maybe just because I'm a little bit blind to myself, I never really imagined my personal narrative as being a transition from art to philosophy. I never really thought of it that way.
Right.
I thought of art as just something I liked to do, and philosophy was something I felt I needed to do. But actually, I think that's the truth of the matter is that I think, first an artist, and then everything else is just material to experiment with.
And do you think your art background influenced how you approached Buddhist studies or philosophy?
Well, I think it. I think that to the extent that I enjoy art, it has somewhat deterred me from philosophy, but not in the sense that it makes philosophy. Well, maybe in the sense that it makes philosophy relatively less enjoyable, right? But the problem with art, for me as a young person who wasn't very sure of himself, was that I felt that to communicate with people, the message, in my mind, I thought, well, the message ought to be very clear. But when you create art, there are so many interpretations. And, even to get a message across to anyone, you may have to resort to a certain amount of manipulation of your medium. In other words, you may want to anticipate. This is the professional or the career artist's way of thinking. And as soon as I realized that that's how career artists thought, I had much less interest in it. Philosophy, I thought at that time, somewhat naively, was more objective. Less driven by personal motives like ambition, pride, prejudice, and so on.
What first inspired you to get into philosophy at all?
I think just because I was, one of those weird kids that asks, at the age of 4 or 5, what is the meaning of life?
Oh,
Where do I mean, maybe all kids ask that question, but they probably don't get stuck on it the way I did.
Wow. All right, so let's get deeper into Buddhism then. To my knowledge, it's such a vast field, but it has 3 specific branches, Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Would you be able to briefly explain the differences between them and perhaps how differently they approach enlightenment?
Well, I wish I could remember the answer I gave on my 8th grade social studies test. We had to describe the difference between so-called Hinayana and Mahayana. Okay. And I'm sure I didn't remember anything about either of those after 8th grade, but...
Maybe I was your examiner a lifetime ago.
But, first of all, this is a point that is made again and again, and especially it's made by academics who study Buddhism in a cross-cultural way,
right.
Which in academia you have to study Buddhism in a broad way as well as a specific way. And so the describing Buddhism as it actually exists historically and in different parts of Asia, the terminology used these days mostly is Theravada, which refers to Southern Buddhism, and Mahayana, which refers to everything else.
Gotcha.
Right. So, and that distinction is somewhat less than razor sharp. In other words, there's a lot of cultural and also philosophical commonality. Otherwise, Theravada and Mahayana wouldn't also both be Buddhism. But the so-called Theravada, which sometimes is confused with Hinayana, but I can say later what Hinayana is supposed to be.
Okay.
But first, I'm just going to say what Theravada is.
Please.
Theravada is probably the oldest form of Buddhism, and specifically monastic Buddhism. That means where there's an actual community of monks. Formerly, for a long time, there were no nuns in Theravada, but now they're being reintroduced based on ordination from other places. So that is like the very early form of Buddhism, and you can see it being practiced here in Nepal now, based on the Theravada Buddhist tradition of Sri Lanka and Burma and Thailand.
Right.
So and that form of Buddhism caters to the professionals who are the monks and the nuns and they are trying harder than the average person to reach nirvana, to reach enlightenment in one life, as well as the lay people, who maybe they're not trying to reach enlightenment right away, but they're trying to gain merit. And so the ordained sangha or community provides them with a way of doing that by making offerings and supporting and celebrating certain holidays, and honoring the great monks or nuns who are teachers and so on like this. So this is how the lay community benefits. Okay. So that's the Theravada style of Buddhism, which although it's not the predominant form of Buddhism in Nepal, it is present here. I've gotten to see it up close quite a few times. And but then Mahayana Buddhism is based on, we can say maybe it is more of a laicized form of Buddhism. Laicized means it's been converted from a monastic entity into somewhat more of a layperson's community, right? So Mahayana has monks and nuns. There are communities like that within Mahayana tradition, but in some places, such as the ancient Newa Buddhist tradition, actual monks and nuns didn't exist for a long time.
Yeah.
It's completely in the hands of families, the Bhattacharyas, the Shakyas, particularly those two castes, and everyone else who is a Buddhist is just relating to it in their way, and the real sort of inner circle, as it were, belongs to a particular caste. And this is how the Mahayana and also Vajrayana traditions have been preserved. So Mahayana is based on the idea, first of all, of there's an emphasis on the bodhisattva as a person living in the world, living a typical person's life at one level, and also working for the welfare of sentient beings on another level, on a spiritual level. And rather than looking for quick nirvana, bodhisattva is trying to help others first. So putting others before yourself, giving up, a preoccupation with one's own enlightenment, and really trying to help other people, not just in a material or incidental sense, but in a real fundamental way. So that could be by teaching, the Dharma, but also by helping the poor, giving care to the sick, and also building buildings and temples, making offerings, and so on. Sponsoring different kinds of spiritual activity. So that's a bodhisattva's job, not personal enlightenment per se.
Gotcha.
And eventually, the bodhisattva will reach enlightenment anyway, in spite of himself or herself.
Yeah. Okay.
and then that's just a very cursory description of Theravada and Mahayana, and then Vajrayana is really just an evolved form of Mahayana. You can say it's a cultural enrichment of Mahayana. If Mahayana is uranium-235, and Vajrayana is uranium-238, or whatever the next one is. It's been rendered more powerful by the addition of energy and using very specific techniques. So that's what Vajrayana actually is.
I mean, I saw that you focused a little on Vajrayana during your teaching career. Was there a particular reason it stood out to you?
Well, Yes, I mean, I don't regard the idea of representing or teaching Vajrayana lightly, because it is in a way, it's a very serious subject. I mean, Mahayana is also a bit serious, in a way, because the vow of the Bodhisattva is very, very big, and also, the Hinayana, so-called Hinayana level. But let's just talk about Theravada, because Theravada actually is a living tradition. In Theravada, the ideal is the Arhat or Arhati, who's reached personal liberation, right? So, in the first two cases, Theravada and Mahayana, the ideal of enlightenment is pretty much accessible, to the person on the street, right? And it's kind of like, the use of a smartphone is accessible to just about anyone. Anyone can learn how to use a smartphone, at least minimally. You can learn how to use it. But being able to, what we say, look under the hood, like with a car, you open up to see the engine. Opening up a computer and seeing how it actually works, not at maybe just the programming level, we'll say, not electronics, but the programming level, right? That's more akin to what happens in Vajrayana. So in other words, the inner workings of body, speech, and mind are exploited to a much greater extent. Because actually, we have a tremendous capacity as human beings. We have Buddha nature, and also our physical bodies have the capacity to become enlightened. When someone reaches moksha or liberation, right, something has to happen physically. I mean, it's not necessarily visible to other people, but something happens, and that's why they say, oh, that guy, that Buddha over there, he's so different than the other religious teachers. Those other religious teachers are like very emaciated, sunken-eyed, grim, negative, depressed.
A little.
And the Buddha, he's so happy, Yeah. So anyway, but the Vajrayana actually works with the subtle energy of the body. And also the subtle energy of speech. And especially it tries to uncover or reveal for the meditator in their direct experience what the subtle nature of mind is.
Okay, wow. All right. Well, let's get into mantras now. Okay. One of the most well-known mantras is Om Mani Padme Hum, at least around here. I mean, I've heard it so many times. I'm pretty sure I've chanted it a couple times as well. But I'm not entirely sure I know what exactly it means. So can you delve into, a deeper meaning of such chants? Well,
I should have researched this question before I came here. And I just want to say that actually the possible meaning of Om Mani Padme Hum is infinite. There are so many ways that it could be explained. And, in the mind of, a literary genius who is also like a very advanced meditator, that such a person might be able to, to spin hundreds or thousands of pages of commentary on this. And in fact, people have. Over time, a lot of written material has accumulated. But it's not just the idea of what it means, but also what it does. What it's capable of doing. And but to give just a kind of a simple idea of what it represents, first of all, it represents the 6 realms of samsara. So the 6 realms of samsara are from the bottom up, the hell realms, the preta or bhuta realm, the animal realm, human realm, asura realm, and deva realm. Or God realm, like that. Okay, anti-gods and gods. So asuras and devas, or suras and asuras. So, so the syllables represent those 6 realms, starting with Om. I think Om is the gods, and then Hum maybe is the hell realms, and so and also those syllables represent the particular form of Lokeshwara, or Avalokiteshwara, as he's called in the greater Buddhist tradition. But here they just call him Lokeshwara. Okay. Right? And so there's a different form of Lokeshwara in each of those realms. I mean, according to some ways of meditating on this mantra. So some ways of visualizing. And also they each have a different color. In God realms, the color is white, and the hell realms, the color is red, and then pick a color in between for the other realms, and so on like that. Yeah. I mean, it could be. There's different ways that it could be presented, and I'm not intimately familiar with any of them, but that gives one sort of basic idea.
Yeah. Well, so there can be different intentions behind the same mantra then.
Well, there are many ways to recite that mantra.
Okay.
Yes, and the simple way of reciting it is just to do it with faith, to believe, and to maybe spin a prayer wheel,
Right.
By hand, or walk around, Kasti Mahachaitya, or one of the other places that has prayer wheels, and turn the prayer wheel, because all of those prayer wheels have Om Mani Padme Hum inside.
Yeah.
So that's the simpleton's way.
Gotcha.
Or the lazy man's way, lazy woman's way. So if I know one, famous Rinpoche that he's revered by tens or hundreds of thousands of people, Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche. Somebody asked him, Rinpoche, what is really the quickest and easiest way? And basically he said, walk around a stupa and spin the prayer wheels and do that, until you drop dead. Then you probably won't drop dead. You'll sit up like a yogi, and you'll emanate rainbows like that. So that is one way to practice Om Mani Padme Hum.
Gotcha. Okay.
And many people just recite it mindlessly, and they spin the prayer wheel. I'm sure there's still some benefit, but someone who recites it with a good attention and has some instructions from a teacher how to visualize, how to train your mind, how to develop compassion and love, because the whole point is compassion and love. Right. That's the meaning of Mani and Padma.
Okay, gotcha.
So Mani and Padma correspond to like wisdom and compassion together. So someone who focuses a little bit more on the actual practice, and again, it could be someone who can't read any language and doesn't know anything about anything. But if they do it long enough and they really have the right intention, then also they will, be liberated in this life. That's the promise of the sutra and tantra texts that teach this mantra. They say that, and I think that's, probably true. I mean, who am I to question?
Okay, yeah. Well, let's talk about healing mantras for a little bit. Do you have? I mean, everyone's so into healing these days. So
that's right. It's a theme.
Yeah.
Healing is. It's something we can all relate to, because we've all been sick, we've all been hurt, physically, emotionally, and so on. So everyone can relate to healing. And in the case of great physical or psychological pain, the way to practice Buddhism has to include something like so-called healing. And the reason why is that, what Buddhism treats is not, the kind of wound that gets treated in an emergency room, to extend the metaphor here. Buddhism is like a medicine. The Buddha is like a teacher, is like a doctor. And a person who follows the Dharma is like a sick person, right? That's the metaphor that's used. So, but Buddhism doesn't necessarily have the best triage for like deep gashes, when your guts are hanging out. I mean, for that you need family, friends, or nowadays you can get other kind of professional interventions. So whether it's a medical situation or a psychological one, on the front lines of samsara in the human realm, then sometimes Buddhism doesn't apply directly, but it can always help. Right. It can always help. But then, beyond, just taking care of the really big pains and the disabling, injuries to our psyche or our bodies and so on. I mean, beyond getting over that or beyond healing that, then there's still just the ordinary level of suffering, of desire, aggression, pride, and jealousy, and so on. So that's what needs to be healed. Actually, is those. Okay, so those emotions are connected somehow to illness. Also, they're not necessarily the direct cause, but some emotions like anger. Obviously, anger can, turn a person's health worse almost immediately. And people get angry and then they have a heart attack or a stroke. Their blood pressure goes, right? So obviously, the emotion of anger needs to be healed to protect, physical health. But that's just sort of in a general sense of healing. The way that I wanted to say something about healing in Buddhism is just to point out something that all healers, professional healers, and especially people that do so-called energy healing, and that would include Reiki, or many, many other techniques that might exist, Qigong, and so on. But these methods all relate to the natural elements, to earth, water, fire, air, and also space, right? Mm-hmm. So these 5 elements are related to healing as well. And, in terms of the practice of mantra, the actual sounds that are used, as well as the colors that are visualized, all of these can correspond to the elements. So one famous teacher who wrote a very interesting book called Magic Dance. In this book, Magic Dance, the author Tinley Norbu describes the basic method of healing, and it involves absorbing the pure energy of the elements. So you visualize the 5 elements in their own color. Water is white, earth is yellow, fire is red, air is green, and space is blue, like that. That's not a hard and fast assignment of colors, but it's something like that.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
There are other systems where they might switch blue and white, and like that.
Yeah.
So and basically you just use the power of visualization and the power of positive intention, along with the absorption of these pure elements in the form of light. You breathe them in, and you heal yourself that way.
Without the use of mantras here.
You don't have to have a mantra.
All right.
But when you consider the way mantras are taught, and I'm not really at liberty to I don't want to throw any fancy examples around, right? It's better to learn this subject, in the right way, like with a guru, and with a gradual approach to it. But in general, let's say like the syllable Om. Everyone knows Om.
Yes.
Om is not a secret. Right?
Definitely not.
And, Om, and especially when it's written in Om Mani Padme Hum, usually Om is white. So it symbolizes water.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So you could use the syllable Om, to absorb in yourself, or to send to another person the pure elemental essence of water. So for someone who's suffering from a condition of lacking water, or who has too much earth and fire and needs to be balanced somehow, then you can use the syllable Om and the color of white and so on, like that. So it's really very, this level of approach to healing is very simple.
And have you come across any stories of, healing or transformation through these practices that you've just mentioned?
Well, I didn't reflect on. We discussed this question before, and I didn't really take any time to reflect on it. But I'll just start with one story.
Okay.
And I won't say the name because he might not appreciate it, although he probably wouldn't get back to him. But this Lama is still living, and he's a resident in the Kathmandu Valley and has been here for a long time. But this was more than 30 years ago. And a friend of mine who was a close student of his, this Lama, he's a Tibetan, Buddhist Lama who teaches in the tradition of what they call Mahamudra and Dzogchen, which are the highest level of point of view. So he among other things that he is well known for, that was the kind of Lama he was. In other words, kind of special, rare teacher, not a very common teacher. Anyway, so a friend of mine was in retreat with him, and she sprained her ankle.
Okay.
And he had been doing some mantras and blowing it into skin cream.
Oh.
And he put some of that on her ankle and blew on it and told her that, that there was no need to ice it or go to the hospital, that it would be fine. And it was fine. the next day. She could walk on it. She was fine. So, I mean, but this was a very swollen, very badly bruised foot.
Wow, that's amazing.
So your symptoms didn't disappear completely.
Yeah.
But if you've ever sprained your ankle, you know it takes at least a week.
It takes a while.
And even after a week, you're probably going to have an ugly bruise still.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so that's one case. And, that shows something special. But I think it also, not only could it show something special about the Lama, it could show something special about the student also.
Yeah.
Her own capacity to receive. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And what about, have you personally used any healing mantras to, I don't know, stay grounded or focused or any of that? Would you like to share any if you can?
Well, there's one that I can recommend. I mean, these days it's regarded as a secret mantra, but it's also regarded as a non-secret mantra. So it's regarded as both a secret and a non-secret mantra. So I'll mention it anyway. And it's very well known. It's very widely used. It's called Vajravidarana.
Okay.
And this also exists in the Nepali tradition. I don't know how many people recite it these days.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't yet found a Bhadracharya who says, yes, I definitely recite this, and this is how I recite it. I haven't had that moment. But I'm sure that there's probably someone like that. And the Sanskrit, of this Vajravidarana, Dharani, it's quite long. It takes a couple of 3 minutes or so to recite it one time. Okay. I mean, even really, really fast. It takes about 3 minutes. So that's one. That's commonly used for purification.
Okay.
And I'll just mention some other deities, and there's some mantras I can share, like the medicine Buddha in particular. Okay. The medicine Buddha, the mantra begins Om Vaishajya, whereas Tibetans say Om Bekanze Maha Bekanze Raja Samudgate Swaha, like that.
Okay.
But the actual word in Sanskrit is Vaishajya.
Vaishajya.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and so this is an old, very old word, Vaishajya, for doctor or physician.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So the medicine Buddha is blue in color. He holds a begging bowl in his left hand in his lap, similar to Buddha Shakyamuni. And inside that bowl is the arura fruit.
Oh.
I don't know what the name is in contemporary Ayurveda, but it's one of those panaceas that all Ayurveda medicine uses, and Tibetan medicine uses it also. So that's the medicine Buddha. He's really the most famous of the healing deities. I mean, these days, anybody that wants to practice the medicine Buddha can easily get some kind of permission, from one of the lamas here.
Oh,
That's the best way, Of course, I pronounced the mantra the Tibetan way one time, so if you heard that mantra or listened to it again, that might also inspire you. I think there's no harm in saying that one. I mean, but again, the more you can learn, especially when it comes to practicing meditation,
mm-hmm.
Whatever kind of meditation it is, Vajrayana meditation or mantra meditation, supposedly it's secret, but it's not. All of it is secret. Some is much more available. Om Mani Padme Hum and Medicine Buddha, for example, are followed in the Mahayana tradition generally.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the specific mantra we just talked about, can you say that one more time?
Om Vaishajya, sorry. Om Vaishajya, Vaishajya, Maha Vaishajya, Raja, Samudgate Swaha.
All right. And it's used for all kinds of healing, or is it a specific?
Well, it's not really a tool for healing directly.
Right. Okay.
First it's a way of invoking the blessing of the medicine Buddha.
Okay.
So I think just reciting the mantra isn't really enough if you want to make use of the blessings of the medicine Buddha, especially as a healer.
Right.
As a healer, you should have an image of the medicine Buddha.
Yeah.
You should have some offerings, water, flowers, incense, and so on. Like there's something, some complete set of offerings for the 5 senses,
mm-hmm.
And some other things there, like some food, some flowers. and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So basically to honor, right?
Mhm.
And then, it's, one should have a sadhana or a practice to,
Right.
you invoke the medicine Buddha. You bring the medicine Buddha down to your level. I mean, not down to your level, but down into our
Realm.
time-space dimension.
All right. There you
so,
go.
so they become present like that. So, and the way of learning that actually is usually some kind of, transmission. Either something is read from a text, or sometimes the Lama will give you, or the Bhattacharya will give you some water from a vase, like that. From
okay.
a kalash, yeah. So, and that sort of, and then read the text and do the practice together like this. So, then the mantra occurs in that context.
All right.
All right. So that's just, I'm framing your question, right?
Mhm, yeah.
Right. Because first, one has to really heal oneself with the use of the mantra.
Yeah.
But the healing that has to occur isn't necessarily the healing of illness only. It could be the healing of illness, but there's no rule that says if you're sick you can't practice meditation. No, you practice meditation whether you're sick or not, right?
Okay.
But what has to be healed actually is the usual way of seeing the world. Okay.
All right.
So so instead of seeing the world as this, terrible. It is terrible. Just without trying to transform it in our own perception, it is kind of terrible a lot of the time. It's wonderful and also terrible, unpredictable, uncertain. Right. So when we invoke the medicine Buddha or any other deity, Tara, Lokeshwara, Buddha Shakyamuni,
Yeah.
there are many pujas that invoke the presence of these different Buddhas. And so when we invoke them, we're trying to feel extra light,
Right.
and extra blessed and protected, like that. And also, we're trying to gain punya or merit in the act of worship. So we're asking them to be present so that they can help us. Just by being present, they help us, right? So just by imagining the Buddha is there, and that's a help. It's a support. For doing something positive. And so, and that's the healing.
Yeah.
Seeing it that way is the
Okay.
healing
Yeah.
of ordinary perception.
Yeah. All right.
Right, so when we practice mantra in that framework,
Yes.
first of all, love and compassion, we didn't really say that, but it kind of goes without saying. There's the love and the motivation of love and compassion. And the attitude of refuge, of taking refuge. Sharanam gacchami, right? In other words, we take refuge in the Buddha. Then we invoke the presence of the Buddha. Then we worship, praise, make imaginary offerings, and so on. Then we recite the mantra like that. And the mantra just strengthens the connection that we have with that particular Buddha or that particular deity.
Yeah.
So, in the case of medicine Buddha, then what strengthens in the connection is healing power. So,
Okay.
whether it's for ourselves or for someone else,
Right.
and particularly medicine Buddha is very helpful for people that are learning, that are studying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because in a way, the medicine Buddha represents, the Adi Buddha, the original teacher of medicine.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, kind of meditating to him would be easier to get into Buddhism and all of that then?
Well, I'm sorry, it would be...
Easier to, get started with the whole self-transformation spirituality path then?
Well, if for someone who is oriented towards healing, for
Yes.
someone who is a healer,
Yes.
it's one practice that makes a lot of sense, yes.
Okay, yeah.
There's also another practice, I'll just mention it, but I think
Sure.
it's, I don't want to discuss it in detail now, because although it's very easy, it's a little bit tricky for healers, right, to take on, the suffering of another person.
Yeah.
But there is a practice in Tibetan Buddhism. It's part of the Bodhisattva's practice, so it's not really so much a beginner's practice.
Okay,
But in theory, anyone who is properly motivated and can do it. In fact, you wouldn't want to do it unless you were properly motivated, because you can actually take on another person's suffering with this practice. It's called Tonglen. Tonglen. And it's been written about in books, for example, by Pema Chodron, the American Buddhist
Yeah.
author, and she's written about it, and it's a big part of her practice and her community and her lineage, which is her lineage is almost the same as mine. Like the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism that she practices and the one that I practice are very closely connected.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and this is one of the big practices that is done. So but Tonglen, or sending your happiness to someone and taking their suffering into yourself, which is what it means, is it's a serious meditative exercise. And if you're a healer or already very sensitive, empathic, and so on, then you can expect that something will happen eventually if you do this practice. So it's something that a healer can use, but it's also, I'm just saying realistically, right? As a healer, if you want to help a lot of people, then you also have to protect yourself. You don't want to sacrifice your life too soon before you've done as much work as you can do, especially when there are ways to preserve your life force, right? So in Vajrayana Buddhism, or also in Mahayana Buddhism generally, there are various ways of extending your lifespan. Like, for example, meditating on the Buddha Amitāyus. Amitāyus is the Buddha of infinite life.
Okay.
And sometimes he might be connected with the Buddha Amitabha, but in general, Buddha Amitāyus is like a long life deity. Okay. So many people do that practice. There's some mantras. I don't think that they are. I can't repeat them, but but they're not. But it's not a very complicated practice to meditate on the Buddha Amitāyus. And also, you can do it according to the Amitayurdhyana Sutra, the Sutra of meditating on Amitāyus. This has been translated into English probably several times.
Right.
So that's something that from a Buddhist point of view and directed towards healers and healing practice, that's a practice that would be good to do.
Yeah.
Right? Because when you really put yourself out there, whether it's as a healer or as a cop or as whatever it is that you do, but especially when you're physically involved with people, like let's say you're a prison guard. I'm sure there's some bodhisattvas who work in prison. I know one actually who used to work in prison. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, and they really put themselves out there, right? But if they're not careful, they could get burnout from
100%,
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, another huge part of Buddhist imagery and practices are mudras. So let's discuss them for a little bit.
Okay.
Can you explain what exactly they do to help with any Buddhist practices and how they're significant and how they're related to, well, we've been talking about healing, so maybe healing and health in general?
Well, I was saying that, according to, Mantrayana or Vajrayana, that it's like really, making use, exploiting. I use the word exploiting, which is a strong word, but don't think of it as negative or harmful exploitation. It's very positive, right? We're exploiting the potential, the hidden potential of our body, speech, and mind, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the hidden potentials of the human body is the capacity of mudra.
Right.
When we were our ancestors, Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal, were living, very close to nature, but that could also be a very brutal environment, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a certain level of brutality in living that life. But they could also, celebrate the sacredness of creatures, and record certain data related to the seasons and migration and so on as cave paintings. Yeah. And they had tremendous artistry, right? Especially the Cro-Magnon, right? But so what I'm saying is that this shows they had a capacity for mudra, and normally mudra is like a certain movement of the hands. Right. This is what they call pekor. It's like the idea is you have a lotus flower in your hand and you're just passing it from one hand back. This is an integral part of many other elaborate mudras. Mm-hmm. Yes. Basically anything that makes your life more dignified, beautiful, pleasurable, or which provides that for another person, that relates to the idea of mudra.
Okay, yeah. And how can you, how exactly, I don't know if you can get into it, but how exactly does it help people maybe, I don't know, connect better with energies and all of that?
Well, when we, for example, offer water, in a Buddhist ritual, a tantric or Vajrayana Buddhist ritual, we use a mantra. It's not a secret mantra. It's just Om Bhadra Argam Praticca Swaha.
Okay.
And so Argam is one word for water, And Om Vajra Pajam Praticca Swaha, which refers to water that washes your feet and so on. So drinking water, washing water, and so on. I'm sorry, where were we going with this? Just refresh me.
Right, how maybe mudras can help us better connect.
Right. So when we use those mantras, right,
yes.
and invoke the mantra actually says what's happening.
Right. Yeah.
And the hands demonstrate what's happening. Right.
Oh, okay.
So the hand gesture is symbolic, whereas the mantra in a way is literal.
Right.
Except it's not just literal. It's actually what some scholar called performative speech or magical speech, and so on. In other words, it's actually, when you say Om Vajra Argam,
you're invoking it.
You're invoking Vajra water. Vajra water means naturally existing water, self-existing water. Water that exists in an immaterial way, but it still has a real effect. Right. So visualized. In other words, we would say visualized, but actually, it's not actually visualized water. It's the pure element of water, the pure elemental essence, like the essence of water.
Right. Yeah.
That's something all pervasive, right? Yeah. Similar to the idea of quantum field. That matter is always being created and then disappearing spontaneously at a certain level. In everywhere. Throughout space, right? So, the idea is that, the natural elemental essence of water exists. It's naturally existing. But here we're particularly offering it, for the Buddhists like that. So when you do the mudra, it just reinforces the idea behind it.
Okay.
So the mantra, the mudra becomes like the engine of the process.
Right.
And it expresses this kind of idea of timeless, natural, or self-existing offering.
Okay, yeah. And I understand that mudras are not always flowy movements, but also maybe stiff gestures, and you just kind of hold it sometimes?
You mean like, when gangsters do this?
Well, maybe not exactly like that. But just symbols they hold and create.
Well, of course, yes. The different deities each has a different mudra, right?
Right. Yeah.
This is why it's so unfortunate that that people, robbers basically, got in the habit of knocking the heads off of statues, right? Because the heads are so easy to transport, and they still fetch a lot of money on the international market, right? On the black market.
Yeah.
So this is how the idea of a Buddha head became popular. Because first of all, in the certain invasions and wars caused Buddhist heads to be knocked off, and then when archaeologists would find the heads, and the heads would go into a museum, and then it becomes an icon, an icon of a forgotten era of Buddhism. But the problem with the single, like the disembodied head of the Buddha, or the headless body of the Buddha, is that one is like the mudra of the other. That the body, the body needs a head to really function as a body, and a head needs a body to really relate to others, normal people in the world that have bodies, right? A bodiless head floating around would scare the bejesus out of all of us. The Buddha wouldn't be popular even if he was good looking.
Yeah.
So here the body is like the mudra. Like the Bhumi Sparsha mudra, or touching the earth mudra. This is the Buddha's right hand. He's calling the earth to witness at the moment of his enlightenment, right?
Right.
And the, sometimes maybe called Samapati mudra, I'm not sure, but this hand, which holds the begging bowl, is also the meditation gesture, like that, right? So those are the actual mudras on the body of like Shakyamuni Buddha or Medicine Buddha. Many Buddhists have exactly the same gesture like that. But in general, the whole body is the mudra, and the head is also the mudra of the body. Like in other words, it's the complement.
Okay,
It's what completes, the Buddha's life includes actually entering the womb, right? So it's not just a material process.
Yeah.
And in the material process, certain things complete that process. Like, for example, when the Buddha marries and has a child, that's also, you could say, I'm not being a scholar now. I'm being just an artist. Okay? But you could say that's also mudra.
Right.
The wife and the child. I mean, the miracle of human life and so on.
Okay. Yeah. Well, when people are meditating in general, then we discussed the mudras, but is there a specific mudra that people can do to fall into meditation faster, maybe? Something that you can share or you know of?
Well, the gurus that I've known,
yeah.
Many of them recommend you just leave your hands palm down on your knees if you're sitting cross-legged, and that's the style of meditation of many great masters in the Dzogchen lineage and Mahamudra lineage. So it's really the most relaxed, natural way. And then, of course, there's the, I forget the exact name in Sanskrit. Maybe it's Samapati Mudra, but it basically, you could say also Samadhi Mudra.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
This mudra.
Yeah. Connection. No. Yeah. All right. Gotcha. And then we discussed statues, going a little off topic, but given your art background, have you looked at like Buddhist statues a lot, Tibetan statues, and I don't know, how do you look at them? Do you like?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you asked that question, yes, especially here in Nepal.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, the epicenter of Buddhist sculpture in the world, and it has been, maybe not 100% of the time, but repeatedly, that the Kathmandu Valley has been that epicenter,
Yeah.
So the influence of the sculptural tradition here, for Hindu and Buddhist sculpture both is huge. It's hugely influential. So yes, I have been looking. I stayed for about 6 weeks as a homestay guest with a family of artists, and the father in particular is one of the great metal repoussé artists. So he, working with silver and copper, and also as a carver, he's an extremely expert carver. And when I was staying there was a solid copper Buddha in my room that he had carved from a single block of copper.
Oh, wow.
The way a sculptor carves from stone.
Stone, yeah.
And it was just exquisite. I mean, I don't know what the market value was, but this would have been, even in spite of only being 5 or 6 inches, maybe 5 inches high or 4 inches high. But I mean, it would have been a very valuable piece,
Yeah.
And, it really made me think for a long time, like, where do these beautiful deity faces and beautiful images come from? Like, what are they based on? And then I thought, well, obviously they're based on the people. First of all, the artists, they put the best of themselves into the piece. So every representation is somewhat, a self-portrait. Mm-hmm. And I've seen this in the style of Thangka painters.
I'm sure.
And you can see like that one, that Tara looks like that guy's wife, actually. Yeah. So and I'm saying this. I mean, it sounds kind of it could sound sentimental, but really, the deities are reflections of the Nepali people. That's I mean, I'm not saying they're only reflections of the Nepali people, but the way we imagine the gods and the Buddhas is based on the people that actually live here.
I think that's a beautiful way of looking at it, and that's true.
And I just I mean, I notice this particularly when I'm, looking at the work of this gentleman, Chakra Jyoti Shakya, who's very well known, I think, in the artisan community.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there was something of him in the face of that Buddha, right? And other, members of his family.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's in his home, so you can see it.
Yes, so I saw them, and yeah. So.
Yeah. Wow. All right.
Yeah. So that's I don't know if that's profound or not, but that has been that's the way I look at the art here now.
Yeah. No, I think it's I don't know if it's profound, but it's definitely a beautiful way of looking at it. So there's that. Let's look at Buddhism in a more modern way. I mean, today's fast-paced world, everybody's a little stressed, they're anxious, and then, they have all these external goals. What does Buddhist philosophy or even wisdom say about balancing all of these external struggles and goals and ambitions with inner peace? Because that's what it's ultimately about.
It's necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody is going to try to find a way to do it. Some people will succeed much more than others. Sometimes even people that try very hard to meditate or to use spirituality, religion as a way of balancing their chaotic or stressful, challenging lives. Even then, I think many people will find that's difficult to do, especially if you're very ambitious. And I was once somewhat ambitious, and that never helped me. Being ambitious never helped me to achieve any peace of mind. But I got a lot of experience. Because of the hard work and the good as well as bad ideas I pursued, that I learned something about suffering.
Right.
And so that's how I learned better how to let go, which was by going through the thick of it. I don't think everyone has to do that necessarily.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's just been my particular life, this particular life, right? So yes, it is. I think it is absolutely necessary, but it can be tricky, too.
Yeah. Any tips on how to achieve it?
Well, one book and if you understand the title, you don't need to read the book. There's a book called "Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism."
Okay.
By Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. This was a classic and modern. English language Buddhist teachings. And it's based on his personal teachings and also edited by him personally. There are many books by this author, but Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism is one of the best. And so cutting through so-called spiritual materialism, what that is exactly, that's something that each of us has to study and practice and be aware of,
Okay.
because it's not the same for everybody. But in general. Let's just say, Nepal is now, in the Kathmandu Valley particularly, has a big middle class component, population. Level of education and literacy is quite high, especially compared to 30 years ago. It's a huge, like a huge transformation. Mm-hmm. And that means that, even though it's unfortunately not true for as many people as I wish it were, but some people have more time. They have more freedom. They can make more choices. They can spend their money. They have disposable income, or they just have more opportunities to do whatever they want. Mm-hmm. And so that's when when Buddhism becomes more accessible. I think there has to be a certain level of affluence for lots of people in a society to start to follow the Dharma in a good way, in a better way. Maybe not an ambitious way. I don't mean ambitious. I mean just genuine, natural. And I think, it's possible that, the developments here in this country in the last 30 years, as well as especially the economy, the economic development, these are providing more people with the opportunity.
Okay, yeah. Well, on a somewhat similar note, modern research is, slowly starting to show that, for instance, chanting is apparently quite effective on your nervous system. Like it helps you gain a sense of calmness. So I don't know. Do you think that modern research is kind of catching up with what Buddhist philosophers or Buddhism has intuitively known for centuries, and now that that's happening, do you think more people are more likely to follow these practices?
Well, that's a good question. I think more people that have a strong science background may be more willing to follow such practices because of that. I don't know about everyone else, but it's certainly very much to the credit of the Buddha and his followers who have also written or preserved those teachings. That science is verifying some of those things that the Buddha apparently knew. Like, for example, he knew that at a certain stage the embryo is like a tube that's open at one end. Yeah. That was something that was taught in the Buddhist Abhidhamma a long, long time ago, long before anybody had a microscope.
I was just, because a lot of people have been starting to take, even quantum physics more seriously now that there are published researches and things like that. So I just wondered if that would mean anything for Buddhist teachings.
Well, I'm afraid to say anything about quantum physics because I know too many people who are much smarter at physics than me.
Oh, I'm right there with you.
Right. So, can you just rephrase your question?
Yeah, no, I just, with how research almost validates the teachings of certain teachings of Buddhism.
Well, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it is also a matter of interpretation.
Yeah.
I haven't really followed in detail, this discussion,
right.
But I have some first-hand exposure to it because I went long time ago, more than 30 years ago, I went to a conference. It was one of the first, if not the first conference that His Holiness the Dalai Lama had with prominent people in science as well as philosophy.
Yeah.
And so that was a very interesting group, and there were some one or two Nobel Prize winners or something like that. There were some smart people there. And I wasn't terribly impressed by the understanding of the participants, when it came to Buddhism. They had a lot to say about their own subject, and obviously they're really excited to make a connection with Buddhist philosophy, but they couldn't really say much about Buddhist philosophy because they hadn't studied it enough, know? So,
okay. Well, kind of in line with that, how do you see, the teachings of Buddhism evolve over time to cater to this modern, fast-paced world?
Well, I don't know if this is happening in Nepal yet, but the teaching of vipassana or mindfulness meditation in the corporate workplace is very widespread in North America, especially in certain cities. I don't know which ones exactly, but I'm sure that, Boston is one of them.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so, but that's one possible adaptation, right? And I think that, the thing about Buddhism and material development is that, when they catch the buzz of material development and affluence, then oftentimes that basically drowns out any poignant awareness of mortality and suffering for months or years or decades at a time, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind of mentality I think that people should be cautious of. But how to warn them and say just be aware that the Buddhist teachings are still valid. How do you say that to people? You can't say that. If they don't want to hear it, they're not going to listen. Mm. So, but one way to hook people into seeing reality more for what it is to tout the benefits of mindfulness meditation for a corporate workforce. And I think in America this has become quite common. Some people are skeptical. They claim that meditating just makes people even more neurotic, and maybe sometimes it does. I mean, there may be scientific evidence that it makes you more sensitive, or maybe it changes your value system so that you situations that you used to tolerate you no longer tolerate.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, and I said this before, that a certain level of material progress is necessary for Buddhism to be able to
Yes.
revive or to become popular and current in a society. In China, this happened multiple times over history in different dynasties and different eras. The popularity of Buddhism rose and fell like this. In accordance with overall socioeconomic conditions. So I'm saying, now actually Nepal is right at a moment where, on the one hand, people could very easily forget that they still need a source of wisdom, in their life. And, the wisdom of the Buddha is accessible to everybody. You don't have to be a Buddhist to do a Vipassana course.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Many people do that, and, Hindus and Christians sometimes even both.
Well, I think that is a good place to stop today.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your
thank you for
being here and for your wonderful insights and sharing your experiences with us today. I think it's been fascinating for me to hear about Buddhist philosophy and all these modern day relevance according to your experiences. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and also you and a few other people in the room were the only live audience today. But I feel that you brought out something better than what I could muster on my own. So thanks for the opportunity.
That's quite a compliment. Thank you. Okay. And to our audience, thank you so much for connecting with us today. I hope today's episode helps you explore some of these practices that we talked about, and it brings about a sense of peace and calmness in your everyday life. Thank you so much once again, and until next time, stay safe, take care, and see you. Namaste.